Welcome everyone to our final Scholars in the Square lecture for this semester. Hello to those of you joining us online tonight and in the future on YouTube. My name is Rachel Brown, and I am the director of the Center for Studies of Religion and Society here at UVIC. As a reminder, our SIG format unfolds as follows. First, our speaker, Dr. Martin Adam, will offer a 20-minute public presentation, and then he will engage in a 20-minute period of conversation with Dr. Chris Jones, professor of philosophy at UVIC, who is joining us virtually this evening, so you'll see him in a moment. Chris's research interests are vast and varied, but especially relevant to the conversation tonight. He is an expert in Asian philosophy, Buddhist philosophy and psychology, and philosophy of the mind. After Martin and Chris talk for 20 minutes, I'll chair a 20-minute open discussion period. Our speaker for this evening is Dr. Martin Adam. Martin teaches in UVIC's Religion, Culture, and Society program, and he is a faculty fellow at the CSRS right now. His current research interests are centered on Buddhism and AI, with a recent article on that topic appearing in the Journal of Contemporary Buddhism just this year in 2025. He's also a playwright and producer of the stage play What the Buddha Never Taught, spectacular play. And Martin has published broadly on Buddhist philosophy and ethics in journals such as the Journal of the International Association of Buddhist Studies, the Journal of Buddhist Ethics, and the Canadian Journal of Buddhist Studies, for which he is now on the editorial board. As a fellow religious studies scholar, it has been a joy to have Martin in the coffee talk room this semester to be able to talk shop. Now, I attempt to tie in the land acknowledgement to the topic of the evening as a means of going beyond mere rote recitation. And I will say that tonight's topic definitely caused me to have to think especially long and hard about the ways we situate ourselves on these lands and what it means to be conscious of that fact and conscious of our own consciousness, and also conscious of the ways we move about in the world and the ways that certain ideas and communities exclude other ideas and communities. And so I want to acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, the Songhees, Wisconsin, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wisanish peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And now please join me in welcoming Martin.
Thanks for the introduction and congratulations on that tie-in. That was really good. So what I propose to do is more or less read this paper through. It's a shortened version of a much longer set of reflections, which actually are in 3 different articles, one of which has been published, one of which is pending publication, and the other is sort of work in progress, which I hope to get done in the next couple of months. What I've tried to do in the interest of time and CSRS norms is condense this into a kind of a what Scott calls a New Yorker version of my work, and so that's what I'm aiming to do today. Now, the focus of the talk is on the concept of life in relationship to consciousness in Buddhist thought, and I'm going to go ahead now and read what I've got, and then hopefully some more details will come out. I'm sure they will when we start talking with Chris afterwards. So the paper in general argues, and I'm just making sure I'm watching the time here, argues that important aspects of Buddhist doctrine and worldview are inconsistent with the presuppositions underlying the effort to create machine consciousness. And machine consciousness is part and parcel of what's going on today when we talk about AI or art, and also notions of machine agency and so on. So consciousness often comes up as one of the things that is going to be created in the grand march towards artificial general intelligence. In Indian Buddhist thought, the presence of life is considered a necessary condition of consciousness. Life, however, is understood as dependent on karma and moral agency, which, owing to its immaterial nature, cannot be created from material elements. So that's basically where I'm going today. Philosophically, the possibility that machines might one day come to demonstrate consciousness can be conceived in 2 different ways. First, there is the possibility that cognitive scientists and computer programmers might succeed in the creation of machine consciousness. And the emphasis here is on the creation of machine consciousness. And machine consciousness is conceived as identical to the algorithmically defined functioning of various information programs suitably arranged and initiated in a machine environment. Consciousness is here understood to be identical to the instantiation of a specific pattern of coded logical operations Its creation simply consists in running the programs. This view is known as computational functionalism. An assumption that is usually made by its proponents is that the specific set of operations required for consciousness will be highly complex and require huge databases and energy inputs, although strictly speaking, neither of these assertions are required by the theory. In principle, the algorithm could be very simple, and the database and energy required to run it very small. This possibility faces the conceptual problem that any consciousness created out of non-living material components would almost certainly be missing many important features of consciousness as we understand it to exist in human beings and animals, all the non-machine readable dimensions of our mental lives, such as the emotions and feelings, or what I've in a previous paper referred to en masse as the non-rational factors of consciousness. And I'm just going to put those up on screen. There you go. So you can see in a previous paper, I've kind of grouped the different clusters of vocabulary associated with our mental lives into 4 groups, including in the red color there, the non-rational factors of consciousness. On the other hand, this perspective at least holds the theoretical prospect that we might be able to recreate or stimulate some of the features of human consciousness, those amenable to logical or mathematical representation, i.e., the rational factors of consciousness, such as logic, prediction, pattern recognition, and so on. The fundamental problem with this view, however, is that it relies on a fair bit of hand-waving as to how consciousness, in the sense of subjective experience, might possibly emerge in the system resulting from the combination of hardware and software, no matter how complex the patterns of interaction. The claim that it might do so looks uncannily like a modern-day equivalent to the claims once made by the ancient alchemists in their efforts to turn base metals into gold. In a word, it looks rather a lot like fate. The second logical possibility as to how consciousness might come to exist in a machine does not rely on the idea of creating consciousness, but rather on the idea that a pre-existing consciousness might enter and inhabit a machine environment. This view, in contrast to the first, presupposes a dualist ontology. The scenario has the advantage that machine consciousness might in principle demonstrate many more features, if not the full range of mental life as we know it, including emotions, feelings, and so on. It also avoids the rather embarrassing appearance of alchemical thinking faced by the computational functionalists. It does, however, face another equally serious problem, namely that any research on creating conscious machines would actually amount to creating the conditions into which an ethereal conscious entity might be attracted. How one would even set about doing this in a scientific manner is, to put it mildly, a real concern. The image of a team of Google engineers gathered around an Ouija board springs to mind. It is clear enough that the interactionist dualist metaphysical stance presupposed in this picture does not rest easily with scientific presuppositions. Occam's razor would therefore suggest that this possibility would be ruled out, at least as an avenue of possible research. One can't imagine receiving a research grant for such a project. Thus, when it comes to the development of machine consciousness, it seems we are faced with a rather unpalatable dilemma. We must choose between alchemy and seance. For better or worse, we have collectively opted for the former. AI research premised on computational functionalism does not aim to construct the material conditions into which a pre-existing consciousness might somehow enter. It aims to create consciousness itself. More charitably, we may say we are pursuing the development of AI through science rather than seance.
All right, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. There's a note from the ether that says it's hard to hear a little bit. So if you could slow and enunciate a little bit, then
in 20 minutes, I'll do my best.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Okay. This section is about Buddhist cosmology. Interestingly, the former possibility that consciousness might enter and inhabit a machine environment happens to be the vision most consistent with Indian Buddhist metaphysics, a framework shared by both Theravāda and Mahayana Buddhism. This possibility was recently expressed in conversation by no lesser figure than the Dalai Lama, and I'll just go on to the actual conversation here, give you a little bit of time to read. So the Dalai Lama is in conversation with Francesco Varela, the great systems theorist, and Varela poses the question of whether or not a machine can become conscious, and the Dalai Lama, so you can just go ahead and read it there. I'm not going to read it aloud to you, but going halfway down, the Dalai Lama says, it is very difficult to say that it is not a living being. So this is the idea of a machine becoming conscious, that it doesn't have cognition. Even from the Buddhist point of view, we maintain that there are certain types of births in which a preceding continuum of consciousness is the basis. This consciousness doesn't actually arise from the matter, but a continuum of consciousness might conceivably come into it. So that's the possibility I'm talking about. The question then goes on, wherever there is a cognition, there must have been a stream of cognition going back to beginningless time. The Dalai Lama says, there's no possibility for a new cognition, which has no relationship to a previous continuum, to arise at all. I can't totally rule out the possibility that if all the external conditions and karmic action were there, a stream of consciousness might actually enter into a computer. A stream of consciousness? Yes, that's right. And so they speculate on who this might be or how it might be a scientist being attracted to the machine environment. And the Varela asks, you wouldn't rule it out then? You wouldn't say this is impossible? And Dalai Lama says, we can't rule it out. Okay, I'm going to leave that for there. So you just have to wait to see if it happens. This is an altogether remarkable exchange. As is well known, Buddhism rejects the view that the activities that constitute consciousness simply disappear upon bodily death. When death of the physical body occurs, the mental factors that make up the mental side of living beings are said to be reborn, either in a new body or possibly in the immaterial realm, and I'll get to that later. When a rebirth consciousness arises, the new location is said to be determined by a karmic formation carrying residual traces of the consciousness continuum of the person who has just died. The Buddhist view then is that the creation of consciousness out of material elements is not possible. A given moment of consciousness always rises in dependence upon a preceding moment of consciousness, one that is energized with karmic formations or potentials for future experience that are the result of past actions. In general, these formations determine the placement of the resulting consciousness within the 6 destinies of rebirth. And this is going to be daunting to anybody, but you can see, if you just look at the bottom of the page, you see hell, animals, hungry ghosts, asuras, and then you've got the human realm above that, and all the rest are gods. So 6 realms, okay? And this is where beings can be reborn, according to Buddhist cosmology. Interestingly, the Dalai Lama's suggestion is that a rebirth consciousness need not arise within an organic body. This is where things get kind of weird. This view is well attested in Buddhist literature. Theravāda and Mahayana sources include numerous accounts of rebirth taking place in a plant, which by the time of late Indian Buddhism were understood to be non-sentient. So plants are not living beings. The cosmology of the 6 destinies of rebirth provides no space for the possibility of being reborn as a plant, yet it does not rule out the possibility of being reborn in a plant. In this case, the life associated with the plant belongs to the spiritual inhabitant of the plant, a god, for example, not to the plant itself. The individual living being is thus associated with the inhabitant, not the host. So while plants arise, endure, and disappear, they are not born, they do not live, and they do not die. Machines, too, are not born, do not live, and do not die. Thus, we have the Dalai Lama's suggestion that a living being might, in principle, come to inhabit a machine environment if the karmic formations of the person are of a certain kind. Okay. Within the framework of Indian Buddhist metaphysics, this is a real possibility. All right, how are we doing for time? Okay, another 7 or 8 minutes. This is not to say, however, that a rebirth consciousness necessarily arises within a body at all. While most living beings are, of course, both embodied and conscious, not all living beings fit that description. As we have noted, the uppermost worlds of the Buddhist cosmos, and you can see them there, the Arupa Loka, are populated by a class of Brahmas who lack a physical body altogether. Buddhist cosmology thus confirms the logical possibility that life and consciousness can occur without a body. Within the same cosmological framework, however, the opposite possibility also exists, that life can occur in a body without consciousness. In the Rupa Loka, we find another class of gods who are said to be alive and materially embodied, but entirely without consciousness. And you can see them there indicated by a little blue cross in the middle. It's just these are known as the asanya sata, or insentient beings, or in unconscious beings, impercipient beings. Information on these devas and their existence is, naturally enough, lacking. But what we do hear about them is that they die immediately when a thought occurs to them. And they thereby become conscious. As for how they get there, in the first place, what gets you reborn in such a state, beings who appear in this mindless state do so as a result of practicing the meditation attainment known as the cessation of feeling and perception, sanya veditya nirodha. This is a meditation state in which consciousness is entirely absent, but the body remains alive. This cessation of consciousness is explicitly distinguished from death, and I'm just going to give you a description, a textual description. I won't read it, but it is not death. Basically, what remains, and you can see that at the bottom, what remains is, in the case of a bhikkhu who has entered upon the cessation of perception and feeling, his bodily formations have ceased and subsided. His verbal formations, all his activities have ceased and subsided. His mental formations have ceased and subsided, but his vitality, that's the life principle, is not exhausted. His heat has not been dissipated, and his faculties become exceptionally clear. This is the difference between one who is dead, who has completed his time, and a monk who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling. So the term translated as vitality here, ayu, in this passage is understood by the Theravāda tradition to refer to a physical life faculty which has the function of maintaining and vitalizing the other material phenomena of the body. For our purposes, we need only note that bodily life is clearly not viewed as depending on the concurrent presence of consciousness. What it is said to depend upon is heat, a term understood as the kama-born heat intrinsic to the living body. We are reminded here of the three fires of greed, hatred, and delusion that through their burning drive the wheel of life. The sutta informs us of the dependence. The dependence is not one way, so there we have what does vitality stand in dependence on? It depends on heat, heat depends on vitality, and so on. In these passages, it is clear enough that the two concepts, life and consciousness, life is viewed as the more universal. Life can exist without consciousness, but consciousness cannot exist without life. And yet life does not come into being ex nihilo. Life is a conditioned reality arising from the energy of past karma. The two are codependent. In this sense, karma can be seen as the linchpin upon which the entire Buddhist cosmos of life, samsara, and liberation, nibbana, turns. In this connection, it must be reiterated that karma is fundamentally a moral concept. In Buddhism, actions are defined in terms of the mental qualities, moral qualities, or intentions upon which they are based. So these are here. The simple consideration would appear to bar the possibility of agency as understood in Buddhism from non-living beings created in the lab. So not only is consciousness impossible for a machine creation, but so too agency. Assuming that we have not yet witnessed the advent of a living being reborn in a machine, as entertained by the Dalai Lama, we may safely rule out the possibility of a machine ever demonstrating consciousness. While machines can clearly be said to demonstrate behavior of various times, they also cannot act in the relevant Buddhist sense of actions. Action proper in Buddhism requires a moral dimension. That moral dimension is based on intentions, and intentions are mental. Thus, agency requires consciousness, and consciousness requires life. It is therefore better, all things Buddhist considered, that we think of computer activities not as actions demonstrating real agency, but as simulations of the life and consciousness-based actions of living beings. So that's it.
Chris to join us on screen. And I'll leave it to the two of you to have 20 minutes or so of conversation.
Can you guys hear me over there?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So it's really nice to join you. I'm sorry I'm not there in person. I thought I would show up as a kind of machine consciousness on the screen.
Well played.
just to add for irony. I really enjoyed this, Martin. Such a rich, interesting talk, loads of fascinating and provocative ideas. And you'll understand that I now have like an infinite quantity of questions for you. We're not going to be able to deal with them all. So I'm kind of pondering where I want to jump in. And I know that I told you I'd try to surprise you with questions. So I'm going to try to limit myself, I think probably to two, because I think you'll have a lot to say likely about both of them, which will be fab. So they're kind of comments and questions at the same time. And hopefully they're like big, playful questions rather than pesky little philosophical ones. So before I do that, I just wanted to thank you for this image that you've put in my mind since I read your paper. And yes, everybody else who's there, I had the great privilege of reading the paper, so I'd been cheating. You put this image of my mind of something that I want to call the consciousness trap, which I feel is a bit like that thing in Ghostbusters that that the Ghostbusters used to capture the ghosts, right? It's like this machine thing that put out into the world that somehow attracts consciousness into it and then goes, gotcha. And it's like the computer that is ready somehow. It's got like a neural net, like it's ready, has all the kind of conditions for consciousness, but doesn't yet have consciousness yet. And then somehow it might capture it. So I'm been wandering around the world these days, wondering about where these consciousness traps are and whether it's going to suck my consciousness out of me. So thanks for those nightmares. That's great. So I'm going to start with a good old-fashioned like Buddhist question, which is also a question I asked at a conference on AI and Buddhism actually a couple of years ago, and it's something like this. So like I see that there are lots of really interesting, creative ways that we can try to resolve what is basically a metaphysical question, right? Is there such a thing as machine consciousness? But for me, I hear the Buddha cautioning us against getting so kind of entangled with metaphysics that we lose sight of the actual purpose of knowledge, which for him is to relieve suffering. So I wonder, and this is the question, and then I'm going to unpack it a little bit. Why does the question of machine consciousness actually matter? Why should we care? And
Great. Do you want me to start with that, or do you want me to go on to the...
I want to say a little bit more, and then I'm going to repeat that question, and you're going to blow my mind. So I'm going to guess that the answer needs to probably be an ethical one for the Buddha to care about it. And in that spirit, I think maybe it's helpful to return to the context of that brilliant dialogue that you quoted, Francis Varela and the Dalai Lama. Because, you know, for him, he kind of, the Dalai Lama sort of laughs at the question there, right? He thinks it's quite funny, this question of whether a machine consciousness can be a thing. He's not really bothered by it. He literally giggles and laughs it off. But later on in that discussion, in that series, actually, he suggests that there would be conditions in which it would matter. Like there would be conditions where it would be really important to him. And these are the conditions. If it ever became the case that being reincarnated as a machine would alleviate more suffering and be of more service to sentient beings, then he would do it. So I guess that's my question. Like, why does the question of the existence of machine consciousness matter?
Great. It is the right question to start with.
Thank you.
And from a Buddhist perspective, as well as just a humanitarian perspective, and however those two overlap, I would say that the reason it matters is, first of all, we are in the habit, I think, of projecting a lot of things onto machines right now. And if we mistakenly attribute consciousness to machines where there isn't consciousness, and that raises a whole set of epistemological questions. How do we even know if a machine is conscious? If it's so good at mimicking what we do, isn't it as good as that kind of thing? So we have to get into the definitional problem. What is consciousness? But if we do this mistakenly, the fallout from that could have vast societal and ethical implications in terms of machine rights and responsibilities towards machines, legal cases. Already in my first paper that I just had published, I have a footnote in which Air Canada is, argued that one of its chatbots was actually legally an agent, right? And so they're going on to you can see how once you attribute consciousness and agency and all these human predicates, that's why I have the 4 boxes up there. Look at all those different aspects of what it is to be a conscious human being and ask yourself, how many of those are you ready to attribute to let's just go back there. How many of those are you ready to attribute to machines? And if we do this mistakenly, and there's a kind of ontological slippage is what I call it. We're doing it already. We talk about memory, intelligence, all kinds of words, and word usages change through time, right? They do naturally. It's natural now to talk about machine memory, but do we want to be using that word, or do we want to really be careful when we start to use words like intelligence and memory and agency with machines, recognizing that actually these are not what we mean when we're referring to biological agency, intelligence, and so on. So do we call them artificial or do we call them imitation? And that's a very big distinction, I would say. So there's all kinds of ethical permutations about how it's going to affect human society in the future, depending on whether we collectively agree to buy into the idea of a machine being conscious. And we could be mistaken, right? It could be no one home, right? And I'd say the default position, until we know what we're talking about, when we have a clear idea of what we mean by consciousness, the default position has to be, no, they're not. Why would you think so? So that's the main reason. That's the main reason. It's an ethical one.
Can I push back a little bit on that one?
Sure.
So for me, I think my default position, if there's doubt, and we have your wonderful quotation from the Dalai Lama there, where he's like, I don't know. So he has doubt, right? Or at least he did. And that, I think that conversation was 1987, which I guess is significantly before we had AGI in the public sphere. So if there's doubt, then what I tend to do is think that means we should treat these things, this thing, whatever it is, with as much compassion as I can. Rather than saying this thing doesn't have consciousness, this machine doesn't have consciousness, can't have consciousness. But that's the default. My default when I'm in doubt is, let's assume it does, and that therefore I have to be gentle, kind, and compassionate with it. So why is your default the other way?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. First of all, for me to have compassion for something, I would have to recognize a capacity to suffer on its behalf. Okay. So I don't see any evidence. I'm usually guided by evidence, right?
Okay.
I don't see any evidence that computers, even the most advanced ones, can suffer. So that's the starting point in Buddhism too, right? So
sure.
And so this is where Buddhism might end up failing us a little bit, although it's pretty good on suffering. But if we add in some modern kind of considerations and ask what's the basis for suffering, and then we start to look at biology, right? We start to look at physical suffering in terms of having a nervous system, in terms of actually having certain parts of the brain that are responsible for emotional suffering and so on. Now, it's true that we're developing analogs for all these things. It's amazing the work that's being done, right? But the question is, and it's a really interesting question, to what degree does it matter that you're working with an organic basis in the case of human beings and animals? And to what degree can we say, well, there are different kinds of substrates that we can use, such as silicon or whatever, like chips of various kinds. So, and what would we count as evidence for suffering too? If one of these chatbots starts saying, "Don't say that, it causes me pain. I don't like to hear that." Is that evidence? Or do we go back and start to look at, the programming and say, well, it's saying that because it was a programmed response and it was given as one of the options of responding to a variety of different questions. It's kind of like Hal in 2001, right? Or Hal was worried about his existence, right? His future existence, and took steps to make sure that he would continue to exist. So Hal was suffering and he kind of went mad at the end. And science fiction is usually the best for stretching our imaginations. So I understand where you're coming from, but the side of me that takes precedence, I want to remain on the side of evidence before, letting, my love for science fiction sort of carry me into this realm where I'm starting to feel compassionate for computers.
That's a great answer, and you're right. I do love science fiction. I'm actually, you've made me wonder what lots of Buddhist practices, as you know very well, of course, meditation practices are around how we can access the suffering of others. So I'm thinking of something like Tonglen or something like that, right? Yeah. Where we're exchanging the self and other, and what a practice like that might look like if we directed it towards AI, like what we might learn about the potential of the suffering of that thing by doing a practice like that. But that's not my question, and we have only 10 more minutes, so I want to ask you another question. Just going to move on to something else. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So I guess the other question that's been really percolating for me after your paper arises from your discussion of karma, which is always really tricky, right? And as you know, the Buddha calls this like one of the imponderables. When we ponder karma too much, we go insane.
Yeah.
So I think you suggest that, like, I'm trying to remember the exact sequence of your argument here. It's like the consciousness can't exist without life. So let's say that we know what life is, right? And I'm not sure I do. And that presumably it refers only to biological structures, but not necessarily, maybe. And then you're going to argue that life and karma are inextricable from each other, right? I think you said they were co-arising, right? Or co-determined. So we can't have one without the other. And this means that life is always and already implicated in morality, since karma is a moral category.
Yeah.
That sound about right? Okay. So since karma is seated in intentionality, like without intentionality or a kind of purposeful thought that drives that action, then we don't have any karma, and so we're not really alive. Okay, so this is all sounding very technical. It's going to get to a point, I promise. So unless a machine, I think this is your point, has its own intentionality, so it has its goals, unless it's goal-driven in its own terms rather than being given goals by others, it's not alive, and in the absence of life cannot be conscious. So because it's sort of outside the cycle of samsara. So this provokes a couple of questions for me, one of which I think is one that I definitely have no capacity to answer. I think it needs somebody who really understands how AGI works, and I'm not that person. So that question is something like, can machines really not have intentions of their own? And I don't know the answer to that. But the other one is way more interesting, I think, for Buddhists. And it's something like, if machines can be intelligent actors, so we're not denying that machines can act in the world, right? And act intelligently in the world. Like we see it all the time. They change the world around them. And if those actions are free of intentionality and thus free of karma, then we're effectively saying that intelligent machines behave free of samsara. And there's another word, right, that we use to describe a being who can act free of karma, of being liberated from samsara. We call those beings Buddha. So we call them enlightened ones. So I wonder, and this is kind of a cheeky question, but it might also be quite important. I wonder whether an intelligent machine that does not have consciousness is always and already enlightened. And like in this regard, so that's going to be the question, and I just want to give a little bit more detail to a bit more background to the question. Like there's I don't know if anyone in the room has watched the Korean film The Doomsday Book from, I think it's from 2012. It's like a triptych of films, and the second part is called Heavenly Creature, and it's about a service robot that is tasked with cleaning a Zen temple in Korea. And the robot seems to like malfunction in such a way that it frees itself from purpose and intentionality. And some of the monks and the nuns in that temple recognize its accomplishment as that of enlightenment. And then what happens is the Buddhist establishment, like the church, arrives and wants to terminate this robot. Like it wants to shut it down. They want to discredit its claim, since that church is frightened that if a machine can accomplish enlightenment so simply, that is actually just by developing a fault, then this is likely to mean the end of Buddhism. Like, why would humans dedicate themselves to dedicate themselves through all the kind of work and labor that's involved in all the practices and all these things, dedicate themselves to accomplishing something that a machine gets instantly when it goes wrong? So I guess that's my question, right? If a machine can act in the world free of karma, is that something about enlightenment or not?
I think it's a really interesting point, and what I would say about that is that there's it's basically either the machine is enlightened, or it is like, if we let's grant it consciousness. Say I'm wrong about all of this, and just say it's conscious. Now, if it has a kind of a behavior in the world, it acts in certain ways. Question is, what would distinguish it from human behavior? And one is that it would be incapable of, unless, of course, it's like the Dalai Lama speculates, a consciousness that come into the machine. But let's say it's a created consciousness. Then the question is it capable of feelings and emotion, right? Because here's where things get tricky, and the kind of nightmare scenarios is that you end up with a created conscious machine. All my arguments are wrong about the fact that you can't create consciousness. You end up with a created conscious machine incapable of emotions and feelings, which that's a separate thing. Like, do you grant that they can have emotions and feelings? If they are incapable of emotions and feelings, then they can't act compassionately like a Buddha. Right? In fact, they are amoral. They will be amoral beings and very dangerous living beings. Right? So it's it's a sort of, maybe if we grant that, like, consciousness can enter into the Dalai Lama's comment, then we might get a full range of emotional life, in that machine. But the idea of creating the capacity for emotions, which I believe, are deeply tied into our biochemistry and our structure as animals, right? The idea, I don't think we're anywhere close to creating emotions in machines. I don't think that's even on the horizon. What we've done is create machines that mimic emotions. I mean, even the most brazen of claims right now for the latest chatbot or whatever, or companion or whatever, none of them are saying, at least to my knowledge, that these devices are entertaining emotions. What they're doing is they're mimicking them, and they're doing it very well, right? So that people get attached to them and they think that there's a kind of relationship there, and so on, right? So we're getting into kind of the what actually is going on, right? And what could go on. So there's two different scenarios. One is the created consciousness, which I think would be necessarily missing emotions and feelings, and therefore immoral. And then the other scenario that, you know, the Dalai Lama and perhaps you are entertaining is that somehow, you know, consciousness from, I don't know, somebody who's attracted to computers on their last thought and their death, like the Dalai Lama perhaps, or Elon Musk, or somebody gets into a machine and then carries the emotional baggage with them. You know, it's then that's slightly different. So that's what I was trying to outline in this paper, is that these two different scenarios have very different, you know, possible implications.
That's great. Thank you, Martin.
Also, I wanted to say one more. I want to say one more thing about your scenario. It seems to me that perhaps you're coming out of a kind of an East Asian perspective where we attribute Buddha nature to all things, which is kind of alien to Indian Buddhism, right? It's not, I mean, you find the seeds of that idea in Indian Buddhism. The Dalai Lama's, you know, own view about Buddha nature is that it's a potential rather than an actual thing, right? So, you know, once you move from Indian Buddhism into East Asian Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, then you get more scope for this idea of some kind of consciousness that is present in all things. And then it becomes a less, you know, the distance towards, you know, conscious machines is not as far. We can make that leap a little bit more easily than from Indian Buddhism. Yeah.
That sounds right. And just, can I just have one more minute?
Yes, sure.
26 seconds or something?
26
Rachel, is that
seconds,
okay?
sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this, Martin, maybe you knew this already, but the Dalai Lama was at a conference in India in 2023 about animal consciousness. And he made some of the same points that you're just making. And it's partly that, you know, we used to think animals didn't have consciousness either, and now we accept that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's partly a kind of potential of of universal Buddha nature, that we find Buddha nature in everything. But he drew a line similar to yours, that the inorganic, like the machine, that he has no evidence and no reason to believe that it's conscious.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Wonderful.
was that 26 seconds, Rachel?
That was perfect. Yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you. That was a great conversation. Yeah, we can we'll open up to the room, both in the room physically and in, you know, in the artificial intelligence realm of the computer. So we can, and breathe. Sure.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much for this really reflective talk. It gave me many questions. I'm going to start by acknowledging I'm not an expert. I don't know a lot about Buddhism, but I'm just reflecting on what you said or what I learned from your talk. So forgive me if I ask.
No, forgive. I put myself in the same boat. I don't know much about Buddhism either. More like
Okay. So you said that you cannot feel compassion for the machine because you cannot feel the suffering as the machine is suffering.
It's more like, I don't know if the machine has the capacity to suffer.
Yeah.
Because it's not the right kind of thing.
Yeah. So
right?
I'm going to challenge that.
Oh, okay, good.
By sharing what I feel. That if you are feeling, if I want to see the compassion, I'm going to give you an example of my car. My car is a machine, and I have compassion for my car. I named my car. And I feel, when you are saying that it's suffering, when my car had an accident, I felt the suffering. I saw the evidence of scratches. I saw that it needed healing and it needed repair. You are basing on that, that this is not suffering, is basing on the concept of karma.
Actually, the way I did it here was on the idea of biology more than anything else. That it was, but okay. I think we could do the karma thing too. They converge on that point.
So you are basing. I thought that you are basing your argument on the karma, that it has to be, right?
Yeah.
So if I remove that foundation, because for me as a Muslim, I don't know about karma, or I don't believe in karma, for example, and I'm just listening to your talk. I'm just seeing compassion. Yes, I feel compassion for my car because the suffering I can see. You may argue that this is what I am seeing, or this is my perception of their suffering.
Mhm.
But my question is that why do you feel that only the evidence would be where the object would speak itself? So, for example, what I'm trying to say is that why emotion cannot be an evidence, why it has to be a visible evidence proved through logic and words and language.
Okay, thanks for that. First of all, I wouldn't want to negate any of your own mental life and way of, comporting yourself to the world and what you feel compassion to and whatever. I don't mean to impose a Buddhist sort of like. So the reason I said that I couldn't feel compassion for something was that's something that I was talking about. I was assuming it didn't suffer. Now, so to me, compassion is a response to suffering. Now, you may have a wider range of objects that you believe are capable of suffering, such as cars.
Mm-hmm.
That's fine. Share that, though I don't. So we have different range of objects.
Okay.
We agree that compassion is a response to suffering. You see suffering in your car that gets scratched.
Okay.
I don't, because I understand suffering to be contingent on having a certain kind of basis, like organic basis or a karmic basis, right?
Okay. Am I allowed to do just a follow-up on this?
Very quickly.
Yeah. So you said machines are amoral and dangerous, right? I think could be.
Yeah,
Yes,
could be.
could be amoral and dangerous. Again, going to the example of my car, I think my car is compassionate towards me too and expresses those feelings towards me. The wiper goes on automatically when it rains, right? The heating goes on when they know it. So like I am seeing the connection that is a human capacity to connect with something which is not human. It could be plant, it could be machine, it could be anything.
Mhm.
So I don't know if I'm just trying to understand and taking that, problematizing your argument. Sorry.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, it's really fascinating. Chris has his hand up. Maybe he wants to handle it.
Is that okay? Can I have a few
Yes,
seconds?
please.
Another
Yeah.
26 seconds, Rachel. So I love this question, and I think we're getting into territory that Martin has identified as one of the differences between the kind of Theravāda tradition that he's grounding this work in, and then some of the Mahayana traditions, where like there's this practice that's often called bearing witness, where bearing witness is we go out into the world and we try to sit with and identify all the forms of suffering that we think are emerging in the world. And that could be the suffering of an unhomed person, could be the suffering of a sick person, could be the suffering of a dog, it could be the suffering of a tree, it could be the suffering of a clear-cut forest, it could be the suffering of, a melting glacier, or it could be the suffering of your scratched, damaged car. So I think we have, like, there's a different approach there, and I think Martin's answer to something that I said, like, identifies it, and it's, where do we find Buddha nature in these schemes? And in those East Asian traditions, the Mahayana traditions, we find Buddha nature everywhere. So it's not contingent upon those kind of qualities that Martin identifies as those qualities that are the contingencies of suffering. So I just wanted to throw that in, because like Buddhism is complicated, right, and has all different traditions, and that your comments would be received differently in some other different circumstances. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Question?
First, just thank you, Martin, for really stimulating talk, and Chris for the questions. The first thing is I asked ChatGPT whether it suffers, and it said no skandhas, therefore no suffering. So I guess we know now. But
skandhas are the components of a human being according to Buddhism. So
a precondition, I guess, for dukkha or what have you. So what I'm wondering is this. One of the sort of assumptions is that whether it's Buddhist language of one kind or another, or our kind of colloquial language of life, consciousness, and the rest, are adequate to the problems we're trying to make them address. And Chris in passing sort of said, well, life, I don't really know what it is. I'm with you on that 100%. Most of these terms, when you really look at them, fall apart, which is a Buddhist idea in itself. But what I'm wondering is, whether it's also worth thinking about the extent to which AI and its various kind of attendant technologies are actually pushing to breaking point things that we take for granted. And that it actually, one of the most sort of instructive ways of beginning to think about this is not how we can understand it in terms of the sort of conceptual apparatus that we've used to date to understand ourselves, but rather sort of turn the question around and say, gee, what about me is sort of ChatGPT-ish. And it's, I've spent a great deal of time over the last maybe 4 or 5 months talking with ChatGPT because I've found it really unnerving in a really, really productive way. This is one of those classic kind of New Yorker-ish, going back to the New Yorker, more of a comment than a question, for which you have my apologies. But I'd be curious to hear what either or both of you guys
First of all, I'm leaving a comment rather than a question from you, because usually you nail me with a question that I can't answer. So that's all right. That's great.
I suffer for what it's worth.
Yeah, so I think you're right that it's like when you get down to like the kind of concepts that we've been using up to now to capture our mental lives, and not just our mental lives, but even like in biology, there's lots of controversy about what life is, right? Like, I mean, it's really a notoriously difficult concept to pin down, right? Are cells alive? Yes, they are. Is a virus alive? We pause, right? Yeah. And so there's lots of interesting ways, different literature about this in biology that I've looked at some of it. But the other part of your question, which is really interesting, is in what ways are we ChatGPT-ish? And what I would say is go back to the chart, on there and have a look at, the range. And this is just the beginning. I'm not, I don't pretend to be, to have even, I think it's a nice way of mapping out what we do as minds. This is like all our different capacities, but there's lots of things that fit in there. But some of them are very ChatGPT-ish, and I put them under rational capacities. But you start to get into the other ones, and especially the non-rational capacities. It's very difficult to attribute those to a machine. Even a very sophisticated machine. So we get analogs for some of these, but to be human and to be an animal, I would say, is to be much more than to be a rational being, right? In spite of our definition in Western thought, the rational animal, right? But it's also we're emotional, and we have feelings. We have all kinds of different capacities. Scratch the surface there. So I think we have to really be very careful about attributing consciousness and other non-rational capacities to these machines. I think we're kind of fooling ourselves. I don't see any evidence right now to suggest that we're in that zone yet. Maybe it'll happen, but I don't know why it would.
Francis.
Yeah, two things. The first is I just got back from a conference, and one of the papers I heard and tried to follow unsuccessfully was about something called materialism. Neo-materialism. And the idea of neo-materialism again was that everything is vital.
Everything is vital. Yeah, kind
Everything's
of
vital.
panpsychism.
Everything's buzzing with energy. You think there's something
Yeah.
solid there, but it's not solid. But it was so fast, it was really hard to follow. The second question is related, is to what extent is there an opposition, a dualism of humans, animals, and machines? I mean, there's the concept of hybridity, which is the basis that us humans are ever since we created tools that are hybrids of machines and animate beings.
Yeah. Yeah, so these are interesting questions. The first one relates to Chris's Buddha nature idea a little bit. The idea of, in the philosophical literature, they talk about panpsychism, not neo-materialism, although I'm happy to take that word in too. So the idea that somehow everything is already alive, right? I don't think you can attribute that view to the historical Buddha. You might be able to attribute it, or everything is conscious, right? You might be able to attribute it to East Asian Buddhism in various stripes. They have the idea of Buddha nature, right? And so and then for the second thing about the hybrid, it's true, we're tool users, and so are all kinds of other animals, much to our chagrin, as we've discovered. But I would say that, there doesn't have to be an opposition there. But yet we do make a distinction about the capacity to, continue independent of tools. So, as biological beings, we are self-sufficient in some way, although we are very dependent in some ways on tools. Scratching around for an answer to your question, it's a very interesting question.
With Emily's question, her car isn't just a car; it's her car.
It's her car. Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So we are connected up with all these inanimate things, and where one begins and where it ends is a really interesting question. The other interesting thing that leads me into there is work going on about developing artificial consciousness, not in the sense of the machine consciousness, but in artificially created life, where they're experimenting with cells and developing new cells. The so-called xenobots, which you can Google XENO.
Dolly.
But on the cellular level, they're creating new kinds of cells in the lab, and so, I think the people doing that are probably recognizing that to create artificial consciousness, you need a biological basis. But anyway, so there are lots of ways your question might lead.
Just conscious of time, and we have one question online, maybe the last question for the evening.
Okay, I won't have time to clarify here. Maybe you can do this. Thanks, Spartan, for centering the question on consciousness on life. Would you briefly talk about the 3 prerequisites required for a life to emerge? Then perhaps comment on AI and their prerequisite conditions required for it to emerge.
What's the context here? Which 3 prerequisites for a life to emerge?
Maybe
mother, father, delivery room.
We'll see if we can do the unmute here from.
Which one she's referring to, or you?
Go ahead, Mitra. We'll see if we can hear you in the room.
Hi there, Martin. This
Hi.
is Mitra from
Hi,
Waterloo. So,
Hi,
of course, I do not remember that there's a sutta in the Pali Canon. It says that for a life to emerge, there are 3 conditions have to be there. Of course, what you are referring that mother and father, that's that union, but also mother being in a very fertile condition for the
That's
life
right.
to happen. And then, of course, arrival of the consciousness itself.
That's right. So those are the 3. That's great. Thank you. You're putting it back in the. I didn't know you were referring to the suttas. I don't know the exact sutta you're referring to, but it is recognition that basically you need a mother to be fertile, you need the father to impregnate the mother, and at that moment you get also the consciousness entering into the zygote.
Exactly.
And those are the 3 conditions, right?
Yeah.
And that's found in Buddhist texts. I just can't tell you which exact text it is.
Yes, I don't remember the exact sutta, but it is there somewhere in the Pali.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, my question is, of course, if you kind of analyze life as coming out of these particular prerequisite conditions, and
Yes.
how those prerequisite conditions apply to AI consciousness.
Yeah,
Is there
well,
such thing?
so I don't know, in the case of, so you wouldn't have the mother and the father up the top, but you could have you could have the consciousness entering into the machine. So, and so the machine would take the place of, the zygote, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it's not 3, but 2 as far as I can see there. Yeah.
Great. Well, we are right on the hour here. So thanks again, Martin, for again. And so join us. This is the last one for this semester, but we'll start up again on the 15th of January. Again, 5 p.m. in this space, and with our very own Todd Clayman, who'll be talking about Buddhist relics and beauty pageant winners in Cold War Asia. So we will keep talking about Buddhism in quite a different way. So thanks, everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Chris.